Well, where did all of those Nazi scientists go as part of Operation Paperclip when they were brought to the United States after World War II? Well, they were brought to the massive underground facility in Huntsville, Alabama, the Redstone Army Arsenal that was eventually called the Marshall Space Flight Center. So it's no coincidence that President Trump yesterday announced that Space Force would be moving 30,000 employees to Huntsville, Alabama.
We had a lot of competition for this, and Alabama's getting it, Huntsville in particular. So congratulations, everybody. Katie, congratulations.
Well, it makes sense, as this is home to the secret space program, reportedly one of the largest underground cities in America, in Huntsville, Alabama. Sources in the U.S. Air Force that I've spoken with directly have confirmed to me that these facilities exist, that they have been used since the 1950s for a secret spaceport. Two newspapers in the 1950s also confirmed that they were building this massive underground rocket facility. You can take a look at this. This was the dumb facility put in the side of the wall here. And this is what it looks like, you can see. And this goes back to the 1950s, underground site plan and requirements. Other eyewitnesses who worked in the secret space program say Huntsville, Alabama is home to a large spaceport used by Nordic extraterrestrials. Yes, ETs. And the Earth Alliance. I know this might be blowing some of your minds who are uninitiated or who are not familiar with this subject matter. This is BS. No, it's not. Alien craft, anti-gravity technologies, all being developed here in Huntsville, Alabama. Richard Eskridge was a NASA plasma fusion propulsion engineer who worked at this facility, co-founded Helion, by the way. His daughter, Amy Eskridge, finally blew the whistle on what she knew. And shortly after this interview, she died of suicide. She says disclosure around the UFO story will come out of Huntsville, Alabama. Listen.
Disclosure is going to come out of Huntsville, Alabama, out of Redstone Arsenal. Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama is the biggest fucking deal that you've never heard of. It's the biggest fucking deal that you have never heard of. Because the fact is that we have deep and wide, extensive credibility that no one knows about because you're not supposed to know about it. Because it's in Alabama, it's obscure. You're not supposed to know about it. That's the point.
People that don't know what Huntsville is. Amy
People know what Huntsville is? Is that what you're saying? People don't know what Huntsville is. Huntsville is the biggest fucking deal on the planet that you have never heard of. Now, like, Huntsville is the Silicon Valley of government national security technology and intelligence community technology and aerospace technology. Huntsville is like the hub. Like, we are number 3 on the first strike launch list. If first strike happens, 3 targets, Huntsville will be one of them. Alabama. This is Alabama, dude, in the deep south. We're in the top 3 first strike. We're in the top 3 first strike because you haven't heard of us. That's why. It's on purpose. I started the Institute for one reason. One reason, the Institute. I started it as a public-facing persona to disclose anti-gravity technology through. Because, I told Mark this, if you stick your neck out in public, at least someone notices if your head gets chopped off. If you stick your neck out in private, fuck you. They will bury you. They will burn down your house while you're sleeping in your bed, and it won't even make the news.
Some people in the chat are saying, how did she find out? Or her dad, who worked there. That's how. Journalist Michael Schellenberger also entered this information into the congressional testimony record, by the way. She's not just some nut job out there. Congressional record that researchers found that Amy didn't kill herself, that in fact she was targeted with directed energy weapons by a private aerospace company and murdered for telling the truth about Huntsville. Needless to say, there's a lot of stuff happening in Huntsville, by the way. Talk to anyone in Huntsville about this and they will tell you that, oh yes, the rumors are 100% true if they're honest with you. Dr. Mike Rosala, who writes at exopolitics.org, he's written multiple books on this. His sources on this, who've actually worked or have worked next to individuals who've worked in Huntsville, Alabama. Pretty remarkable information. And Dr. Sala and I have been texting about this story over the past 48 hours, and it's stunning. So just first at a high level, Doc, great to have you back on the show. Were you surprised at all that Trump made this announcement about Huntsville?
Well, not really, because during his first administration, he already had decided that Huntsville was the preferred location for U.S. Space Command. I mean, Space Force actually is headquartered at the Pentagon. So it's relocating Space Command, which is one of the 11 U.S. combined combatants from Peterson Space Force Base to Huntsville. And so the Biden administration reversed that decision. And now that Trump is back, he has reversed it once again. And I think this kind of like strange battle over the location for Space Command really does reflect this battle between different factions that we've been talking about previously, between this kind of white hat positive faction working with the Trump administration to get the truth out about some of these secretive programs, and those that are part of the deep state wanting to kind of close it all down. So keeping it all in Colorado would have been a way of maintaining the secrecy as to what Space Command is doing. And at Huntsville, the new home for Space Command, you have a history where we know that there has been efforts to build a very large underground base there. That you mentioned those two newspaper records from the 1950s that announced that they were setting up really a kind of mini Pentagon. So this plan for building an underground facility there in Huntsville was set up initially as almost like a continuity of government, or at least as far as the Pentagon is concerned, so like a second home for the Pentagon. So we're talking about something that was quite massive. And you showed that diagram that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers put together for building a very large facility under a mountain. And you notice you've got a couple of entrances there, and you've got this kind of shaft in the middle for this underground facility that would be built under a mountain. So based on what I was told by someone who still maintains his anonymity, he just goes by the pseudonym JP, he's been twice to this facility, and he has identified two entrances and a shaft in the middle, which is used for these anti-gravity spacecraft.
So just let that sink in for everyone. This massive facility in Huntsville has this anti-gravity technology where that middle shaft, where these craft, and there are so many eyewitness accounts throughout Huntsville, throughout that area. The locals know it. They see it. So what are we talking about? Like, how large are these craft? And this is using reverse engineered technology from like extraterrestrial craft for the creation of anti-gravity technology that we have in our possession, and the government knows about it?
Well, this is where the German Project Paperclip scientists came in, because when they came in, they were specialists not just in rocketry. I mean, the Germans developed V1, V2 rockets, but the Germans were also developing anti-gravity technologies using very high voltage electrostatic charges to create a kind of anti-gravity effect, and also studying torsion field physics, where you would build the circular tubes that would be highly pressurized and at high temperatures. And if you circulate the plasma inside it at speeds of above 60,000 revolutions per minute, you again get an anti-gravity effect, but you also get a kind of time dilation effect. So these were craft that would not just be able to propel themselves through space, but they would also be able to travel through time. So you can imagine how useful that would be if you plan to travel long distances. So the Project Paperclip scientists, and we know there were at least 1,500 of them, first many of them ended up at Redstone Army Arsenal, which was then, a portion of that was set aside for the Marshall Space Flight Center. And so the Marshall Space Flight Center was what was in charge of the Apollo program. and Werner von Braun was put in charge of the Marshall Space Flight Center, and under him were a lot of German scientists. But they, as I said, were not just specialists in rocketry. That was the public rationale for why they were there. But they were also there to share their expertise on how to reverse engineer these flying saucer technologies that had been recovered throughout US history, and some of them had been captured in Nazi Germany and brought to the United States. So the Germans were there to help US scientists study and reverse engineer those, and that's why you have some major companies such as Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, that Amy Eskridge was alluding to in her video, that they were there as well, because they are the organizations or the corporations that are building the reverse engineered spacecraft. So from the very beginning, Huntsville, Alabama had a dual purpose. One was the official space program with NASA and the Apollo program. The Germans were playing critical roles in leading that. But the second, secretive, was that they had this massive underground facility that was built there, and that's where they studied and reverse engineered flying saucer technologies. And this is where then we get into the help that these Nordic extraterrestrials began to give to the US government.
So this is important, and your sources are similar to what I've heard separately. I just want to be clear about that. I've heard from members of the U.S. Air Force separately that there's this massive structure in Huntsville, and some very strange things happening there. Can you talk about this, the Nordic extraterrestrial piece of this? I guess the tall whites, right? As they're well known among people in the secret space program. People have been in the U.S. Air Force, whistleblowers and others who've talked about this, eyewitnesses, U.S. Marines who've now been on the record talking about this. Can you talk about why they would be there in Huntsville specifically, and what are they doing there?
Well, for that, I can share one of the reports from my source, JP, who worked for the U.S. Army for 4 years. He was stationed out of Eglin Air Force Base, and one of his missions was he was taken twice to this underground facility in the northern regions of Alabama near the border of Tennessee. And later on, we were able to do some guesswork and identify it as Green Mountain, right up there next to Huntsville. So he was taken into this underground facility, and he says he was taken with just over 30 pilots, international pilots, and they were from all over the world, Europe. And when he got there, he said that these pilots, they all left the vehicle that transported them. It was a bus, and they left and they went to a parked flying saucer, and each of these flying saucers had a Nordic, that's a human-looking extraterrestrial there, assigned to that craft, and they were training the pilots on how to use the technology in that craft. And the technology is this kind of brain technology interface. So it's quite advanced, but the important thing here is that JP identified that there were over 30 different nations involved in this. So this is a multinational effort to train as many competent pilots from around the world as possible to fly in these reverse engineered craft that are kind of like hybrid human and extraterrestrial technology. And that this is something that is part of this, what is called the Earth Alliance, which is really setting up the foundations for what's going to be a kind of Star Trek future. So this ties into the Artemis Accords, why it is that so many nations are joining the United States or joining NASA under the Artemis Accords. There's about 54 nations now that are currently part of the Artemis Accords. And you ask, well, why are so many nations eager to enter into these bilateral accords with the United States that essentially create the Artemis Accords, which cements US leadership in space for decades to come. Why is that? Well, it's because underneath the Green Mountain, right next to Huntsville, in this deep underground military base, there is hundreds of these reverse engineered flying saucer craft that international pilots are being trained on, and that eventually you're going to have similar craft being relocated all over the world. And this will be part of a kind of like worldwide disclosure initiative.
So when Amy Eskridge in that video says that disclosure will happen in Huntsville, and her dad, who knew about it well, then she ends up being, suicided after she admits this. What do you make of that? What do you make that what she said there? Now, this is congressional, this is entered in the congressional record thanks to journalist Michael Schellenberger. So what does she know about disclosure that will happen in Huntsville? Is that what she's talking about? Maybe this like larger sort of international plan?
Well, that's exactly what my source JP was told, that there was a plan for the craft to start revealing themselves, that was something that had been approved. But at that time, clearly there was not consensus, and the Biden administration really, I think, was opposed to that. And so it didn't happen. The deep state kind of cut in and jumped in and kind of like prevented that from moving forward. So I think it was really just a matter of time before you have a new administration coming in that would be pro-disclosure. And Donald Trump is very much, I believe, someone who is pro-disclosure. And I think that goes back into his history from his uncle, John Trump, who was not just involved in studying Nikola Tesla's FBI papers, but John Trump was also very familiar with the kind of high voltage electrostatic physics that the German paperclip scientists were studying, and some of the recovered craft were taken to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where John Trump was a full professor. So I think President Trump is very familiar with this history, and I think he is more than ready to move forward with this disclosure. And Huntsville would make a lot of sense because it's very easy for craft to start flying around. Locals are used to it, and also because of its proximity to the Marshall Space Flight Center, I think that would be something that the press would be very interested in, and it would kind of make a lot of sense.
And friend of the show, Ashton Forbes, I mean, I know that he's waiting to find out what sort of plasma technology and producing its own magnetic field there, and the anti-gravity technology, that the disclosures that he's been pushing for, demanding through FOIA requests and others from the federal government to get answers about this. So hoping that we'll have disclosure in Huntsville, Alabama, but absolutely fascinating. I've been hearing about, and people in the chat room are like, I've heard about this for 30 years in Huntsville, Alabama. We have a lot of people that are very familiar with Huntsville, Alabama. This is not just this is not fanciful information. This is crazy stuff, but real. And for those members of the United States Air Force that have come forward, that, hey, by the way, I should mention, my line is always open. So any whistleblowers who want to come forward and share information from having worked in these facilities, Redacted is a place you can always come. You can also visit Dr. Michael Salla over at exopolitics.org. He does a great show as well, trying to get to the bottom of all of these answers as well. Dr. Salla, great to have you here on the show. Thanks as always.
Thank you for having me, Clayton.
My pleasure.